I'm going to introduce Heather Blume, and I am pleased to have you here, Heather. Welcome.
Hello.
So Heather Blume is a native of Cape Cod. You graduated with an MFA in painting from the University of North Florida, and so a BFA in painting and an MFA in sculpture from the New York Academy of Art. You exhibit your work on regular basis in regional galleries and museums. And this fall, I was lucky enough to see you work in a beautiful exhibit at the Cotuit Center for the Arts. And somehow I was really, inspired because your pieces speak of diversity and connectedness at once. And I was looking for a title for this show, and I decided I would love to call it Shoulder to Shoulder, just like one of your pieces, because at a time of isolation and racial tension, Shoulder to Shoulder seems to fit just fine for our faculty show and our guests. So thank you, Heather, for inspiring me, and I'm going to let you continue.
Thank you, Natalie. And this is a real homecoming for me, because I taught at Cape Cod Community College for 8 years and have not been in an exhibit for some time. So this is an amazing exhibit, and I'm really so pleased to be in it. And also the technical help we've gotten. This is really a great job and a great effort. Scott, oh, okay. I'm going to follow, because that brought me to tears. I got to tell you, I was in Scotland not long ago for the first time. So in just speaking about my work, I would like to preface it by saying that as a native Cape Codder, I do, and others, live on basically what is a giant sandbar left behind in the Ice Age, surrounded by what we now know is an ever-rising sea, and in a culture that celebrates creative people. These factors permeate my life and my artwork. The sea life, the substrate sandscapes, the wildlife, and the people. These factors are all fodder for my artistic gristmill. They filter through me and find another form, but the source is the same, Cape Cod. And I have lived other places, but this is the one I return to. I will speak just a little bit about the series now of work, which actually began, I paint, draw, and sculpt figuratively. That is that's the thread I've found. And when I was at Edge Hill Farm, the residency at Castle Hill, I began doing, as you can see behind me, two-headed, I just work intuitively at times, and this is what I see in the paper, and this is what I did. I painted there for the entire time. And of course, someone told me, another artist, gee, why don't you do some sculptures? And so, although Shoulder to Shoulder is related to that, and that's what we're looking at now, this is more in line with my representational work. And again, I had clay, and there they were. And I knew they belonged conjoined, because that is how we are on the earth. And this is what I believe, and I know the series is about the fact that we all live on one planet. And the fact that this whole series has been inspired by global warming and the immediacy of the need to wake up to the fact that we do not live in a vacuum. We live in a context with each other. And so how as I can, and as an artist, to address that issue in a way that I could do best. And that is what these are about. So mutually speaking is when I decided, okay, now I'm going to make the series that are based on the paintings. The spewing is incidental. It's amazing how things coexist of COVID and what had happened with the expression of these pieces, of how, again, we breathe each other's air, we are connected, and that is, and the plant form of this relates to that as well. People to plants to air. This came about similarly, their clay process being coil and slab building. I've combined this with the figurative. I work both with Western and intuitive art process, hopefully to combine them. Therefore, the body is not anatomical, but the faces and the heads are. I have been going to museums for years, I think, knowing different people, traveling, all of the things that go into my brain come out through my hands. And that is how this arrived. It has wire fired into the head. That's what those little funny hair things are. And then woven fabric fiber, which relates to your work, Natalie. So I think we all influence each other. I'm a walking sponge when it comes to life, and then having it come through whatever medium I'm using. Mythic vessel, yeah. I also happen to read quite a bit. I listen to audiobooks while I'm working in the studio, if I'm sculpting, not if I'm painting from a model. But the India culture from India, myth, magical ideas, woman, definitely, folklore, all of that feeds my imagination. And I think somewhere in my genes, that is what happened in this one. The fiber again, I'm a woman of the 60s. I learned how to macrame. And so I knew I could weave between the two heads and conjoin them in that way so that they exchange ideas. The colors switch sides. So I was going for expressing the idea that we, again, we influence each other. We do not live in a vacuum. We pull together or we fall apart too. But in this one, it's an exchange. And the blessing of being able to exchange in this day. We can exchange now across time.
Thank you so much, Heather.
Thank you. Earn of kindness, and that's the last. And that is my presentation.
Great. And I guess now you are introducing Sean, that you have known for quite a while too.
I'm really happy to introduce Sean. I met her because I gave a cut paper class. Over the years, we have been friends, colleagues, been in mutual exhibits. It's very rare that you get to see a student surpass you. And her last artist in residence was proof to me that in cut paper and cartography, I've been blessed to have a student that surpasses me. Sean Robertson.
Thank you, Heather. Oh gosh, this is such an honor. And Heather, you really inspire me so much with your cut paper work, and that class that I took with you was wonderful, and it's a joy to have you in my life and such an inspiration in my art. And everybody here, this is really an incredible show, an incredible group of artists. for those of you who don't know me, I work in maps. I cut maps and make mostly three-dimensional work out of them. I almost never make anything that is politically inspired or any kind of commentary on the times that we're living in. But there's something about 2020 that just seems to be bringing that out in me. And this is a piece that is that was made really in response to a lot of the Black Lives Matter demonstrations. It's called Unpaid Labor, and it's about, I think it's about 12 inches high and about 12 inches in diameter, something along those lines. So I'm going to read a statement that I wrote about the piece when I made it. It's called Unpaid Labor. Several years ago, I heard Michelle Obama say that African slaves had helped build the White House, where she, an African-American First Lady, then lived. The poignancy of that statement has stayed with me, and I've always felt that despite the election of an African-American president, America hasn't actually moved very far since those times. The White House is surely not the only iconic building to have been built, at least in part, by slaves. And I think a line can be drawn directly from such unpaid labor centuries ago to the economic disadvantages that many, perhaps even most, people of color now find themselves in generations later. I used maps of Africa in reference to where the first generation of slaves came from. And there are 13 figures to represent the 13 original colonies, where so many of them were forced to labor in creation of what became the America we know today. The stitching that binds the figures together speaks not only to the chains the African slaves were shackled with, but also the common history that modern African Americans share. And the shape of the piece is reminiscent of a colonial building or monument. Though being made of paper, it is a little flimsy, as though the whole institutional structure may collapse at any moment. Maybe when it does, people of color will finally receive the payments that should have been made to their ancestors centuries ago. Thank you. I think it's back to Natalie now.
Thank you so much, Sean.
Thank you.
I'm going to introduce now someone you know, Sean, Jane Blume. Hello, Jane. So, Jane, you are based in Provincetown and Washington, D.C. Your work has been included in several shows at the Provincetown Art Association and Museum over the years. The shoulder-to-shoulder video that we saw at the beginning of this event started by your book being read, and then during the movie we saw your mask that you titled New York State of Mind. I'm intrigued by your notion of alteration and manipulation of an existing object and how your collages can change the story to bring us into another reality. So I do find the book and the mask very moving. Welcome.
Unmute yourself.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Natalie. I feel the same about your work. The X-ray ones are blowing me away. Both of my pieces in this remarkable show are focused on face masks, which has become a symbol for safety and for protection. We rely on that for our safety and our protection in this time of COVID. But in so doing, it puts up a barrier as well. And so half of our faces are hiding. And I don't know about you, but I don't recognize people on the street. Many of us look to me very otherworldly, like Darth Vader or the Lone Ranger. But creatively, I began to find that quite intriguing and scary and funny rolled into one. So in that spirit, I asked family and friends to send me selfies when they ventured out for a stroll. And that became the book, Out for a Stroll, that you see now on the screen. It started with what I had in the house at the time, which wasn't much, an old Christmas children's storybook, which I sanded down gessoed, pasted down the portraits, and then I began to manipulate them with an overlay of acrylic, sometimes changing backgrounds or the foreground or the figures themselves. As for the narrative in the book, I used original scripting wherever I could, but again, it was a Christmas story, and this was done back in May, I think. So I used original scripting whenever it was possible. And then I added wording from magazines and newspapers. On the last pages, when the pandemic ends, we all take off our masks and we are, as you have called this show, standing shoulder to shoulder. So it ends in a joyful, hopeful way. My second piece, there it is. It grew from homework from Sean Robertson's cartography art class that you and I took. Her assignment for the last day was to use the maps in what she said was a sculptural manner, sculpturally by curling or bending or folding or crunching, as opposed to the earlier days when we were cutting with our X-Acto knives and pasting. I had just had 2 trips to New York City canceled. So I folded and pasted a favorite New York City bus map into this face mask. It's called New York State of Mind and is pictured on the screen. The aligning of the streets was actually the challenge, like a puzzle. It became sort of fun. And the curly handles were an attempt to represent me wearing it, pining away for the city that I couldn't get to.
Thank you so much. And I guess now I'm going to talk about my own work. So I have lived on Cape Cod for 21 years. I received an MFA from MassArt, and I have been a faculty member at 4Cs since 2007. I teach a fashion and fiber art course, and I have been the Higgins Art Gallery director since 2014. I was first a fashion designer. I lived in Paris and I was making clothes, designing clothes. And I also created my own clothing line at some point that was sold at Bergdorf Goodman in New York City. And my focus on art making started about 20 years ago. I started to show my art in galleries and art fairs in New York, Miami, Art Basel, Massachusetts, and on Cape Cod. I have been invited to exhibit in several curated exhibitions at the Provincetown Art Association and Museum. And I was invited to be the artist in residence at the Cape Cod Community College in 2010. So about 10 years ago, my work changed a little bit. And I started to focus on the body's anatomy. I needed to draw arteries and organs. And somehow I felt that it was a way for me to reconnect with myself. So what you see right now is what I would call a 3D drawing. You can see the lungs in the background that are made out of a very thin linen. And then the arteries are stuffed with fiber and I use basically all kinds of tapes, masking tape and electric tape. And I call, in fact, this series of works, I call them ex-votos because I realized that there were some fears I had to overcome and they had to do with my fear of blood and of wound and also about looking inside an animal body or a human body. And somehow the ex-votos, each time I completed drawing an organ, I hoped that I could slowly part, with this anxiety of mine. But recently, I guess, Kendra, maybe if you want to show the other slides, that would be great. So these are all different organs of the human body mostly. Sometimes I also like to draw organs of animal bodies. You can see a brain on the top right and a breast in the middle. And then I guess we have the spleen that is on the right bottom. So yes, basically I was trying to, in the first image, when you saw that I was using daily objects, I was trying to be closer to organic things. And while drawing the anatomy of a body, I started to find, fascinating the many layers of tissues that line the inside of beings. And to me, they were a little bit like light dresses. They looked a little bit like vines and roots and, sustaining trees. And if you look carefully, I insert all my drawings by using crochet. So crochet for me is the bond. It supports and it holds the work together. And yes, so the logic was to go directly to the real thing, to the X-ray, to the real image of a body. So the first image that you see on the left is my own X-ray of my shoulder. And I decided to insert a bird breast and its wing, the skeleton of one, because I guess I always feel that I'm extremely connected to the animal world. And especially stitching them together with a traditional domestic handicraft makes it even a closer relationship. And I guess, yeah, I think I described everything. There was one more thing I wanted to add. I wanted to add that I was inspired by a line from Emerson that he wrote in his book, Nature, that says, "The greatest delight which the fields and woods minister is the suggestion of an occult relation between man and the vegetable." Thank you so much.